Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. As always, this is where we gather each and every day to help anyone and everyone who shows up learn about modern web-based production. It's where you can submit questions about media creation and distribution in all of its forms, 24/7. The simple rules, one question per submission. And remember, everyone or somebody, our reader typically will have to read it aloud, so try to keep things simple and concise. If you'd like to get into the system to vote, you can use our Mukana system. That's where you can vote the questions up and down. That's a little more sophisticated a pathway than using our QR code, which is about to pop up on the screen here. The QR code will let you scan it with a phone or anything else that reads QR codes and get into the quick system. We encourage both processes, but the main voting system allows you to vote things up or down. So in that way, you kind of program the show and help us understand exactly what you want us to talk about. And that's about what we're going to do right now. So Jeffrey's reading today. Jeffrey, dive into our first question, please.
Morning. Today's first question comes from Peter Moore from Auckland, New Zealand. He asks, the new Auto Series pedals from Game Changer Studio or Audio look interesting. As is their demo video, anyone on the panel ever seen such a complex demo video? The camera arm they show, ABB Branded, is that high-end?
And he has a link there. Jeffrey, have you taken a look at this? You're one of our musicians on the panel.
Yeah, well, the pedal itself is pretty interesting. It kind of feels Moogish than anything. But the arms, yeah, the demonstration was very nice. Of course, musicians aren't going to have that on stage. And that does, as I was watching that video, I kept thinking to myself, if I was a musician and I was trying to do, like, for instance, they had a tone bender on the pedal, and then they had these basically it was a two-arm system come up and then bend the note. All I could think to myself is, gosh, there's no way, because that pedal's going to be on the floor where my feet are. There's no way that I'm going to be able to reach down and turn that dial. So it's a nice demonstration, but the practicality of it is just not. There's going to be no automated arms there to adjust it. So, but yeah, it was a nice presentation.
You could just grow another leg, right? You've got one on the pedal for the bass and one on the hi-hat or something like that. So just
I'd need
grow
a
more
leg
legs,
that
more
actually
pedals.
has a hand to it, because these dials are pretty small.
Ah, okay. Interesting. Well, thank you for your review. Let's dive into our next question.
Next up comes from Marilee Shu, Myra, and Webelu, asking, people just say Jumbotron like it's the Kleenex now, but I don't see any with that name. What were they, and do they still exist?
Jesse, you want to start us off here?
So in the early 80s, Mitsubishi and Sony started working together to build very, very large screens. These were not full-color screens in the early 80s. And in 85, Sony registered the trademark for the term Jumbotron to describe these gigantic screens. They continued to make Jumbotrons until 2001, when they stopped using that term officially. I mean, when I say they, I mean Sony. So of course, large screens are still being made, but they let their trademark lapse in 2001, and it has since been. Another company has tried to claim it. They registered in 2023, but I don't know exactly how that's going now. And since then, it's become a genericized trademark, which means the word was trademarked, but now it's just the word that people use for that thing: Xerox, Kleenex, aspirin, things like that.
Lovely. Let's go on to our next question.
Next question comes from Douglas Carmichael. DJI introduced the Mini 4K. Could it be the new top choice for a starter drone?
Nigel, what do you think?
Again, it depends on who the starter person is. I think as someone who bought a drone and then never really used it, I would encourage anybody, if your starter drone is one that you just want to play with, you can go much cheaper than $200. They're not great. They're typically Chinese knockoffs. You can find them from everything above sort of $60, $80 on Amazon. If you're serious that you want to get into droning and do some really good stuff, this looks like a great point. But when you say starter, where are you starting and where are you ending? What do you really need to do with it? because many people buy drones and then find after a while they get bored with them.
Yeah, I went through that same process myself, so I understand exactly what you're saying. Jesse, you had some additions?
I respectfully disagree just a little bit. You don't want to go any crummier than DJI because, and not that DJI is crummy, but if you're going for like a cheap knockoff, you might find frustrations unique to the cheapest versions of drones. I think the real question is this a decent drone that you don't need an FAA license to fly? And at 249 grams, yes, you can fly this one without a license. The micro SDs are 250 milligrams, so even with an SSD, or not an SSD, a micro SD, you're still under that weight limit. So this would be a good starter drone.
I have to say my first drone experience was like so many others. I managed to get the drone into the air. It managed to drift across the hedge between me and my back neighbor's property and immediately descended into their swimming pool. And that was the end of that first foray into drone piloting for me. I think if I had been serious about it, I would have tried to spend as much time with the less automated ones as possible just to learn all the rules of flying. I remember trying to turn around, if I push forward, is it going forward or is it back? Where is its orientation? All that new drone thinking I had not mastered or even come close to it. So I think any hours in the air are really what gets you to being a good pilot always. So that was my experience, and I eventually said, probably not for me. Next question.
Next question comes from Gabriela Mestia from Sault Ste. Marie. What was that thing on Tom Cruise's leg in the Olympics show, and how does it work?
I think a lot of people wondered about that. Nigel, do you have intelligence?
Yeah, I was one of the people that wondered. I assumed at the time it was going to be a flag, Stars and Stripes, or it was going to be a smoke thing. What I've managed to read is nobody's really clear unless they found a better source than I have, which is probable. But it looks like the most frequent mentions is it's part of the rappel bag for the rope or something. I just assumed it was a flag, but I have to tell you, I've done the research and I can't find the definitive answer yet.
So it's still a question. Well, maybe he'll wear it in 4 years at the Olympics if they continue the gag from the promo. So maybe we'll find out then. Next question.
Peter Moore from Auckland, New Zealand asks, can anyone enlighten me? What are the big lights lamps that they use in the awesome Agnes Obel music video?
Those are lovely fixtures. Jesse, do you have any idea?
I don't have an answer for you, but we're going to bash them up on screen just to see what they are. It looks like it might just be a standard LED spotlight plugged into the back of a very unique dish with some unique frontage on that. The good news is the credits in the YouTube description of this video list the director of photography, and I tracked him down, reached out, and if he gets back, we will answer this question in more detail.
There you go. Perfect. They remind me a little bit. They are not, but they remind me of the Broncolor lights that I saw a good little bit in the early 2000s. One of those huge, like 6 to 7 foot sources that looked very much like these. I don't believe these are those, but there were large scale lights like that, and it looks like they've downlamped them significantly, which is pretty normal for today because cameras are so much more sensitive than they were back in those days. Jeffrey Powers, you had additional thoughts?
They also remind me of Rotolight, which has that's their focus is those circular lights. So I'm taking a guess, a stab in the dark here, but yeah.
I think most of the Rotolights were plastic with LEDs spread around into the surface, essentially. It looks to me like this is more the traditional softbox thing, and I'm basing that on the depth of the reflector. So this would have probably had a single source light in the back of it and then scrim material in front of it to spread out the source and make it a softbox as opposed to a point source light. Again, I have never used that particular kind, so hopefully Jesse's research will prove accurate here. Let's move on to the next question. Jeffrey? Oops, I think you're muted. We're not hearing you, Jeffrey.
Oh, let's try that again. Robert Soji from Los Angeles asks, for the latest Sony cameras, what XAVC file format and recording setting do you use and why?
Jesse Kester, do you have intelligence on this one?
We use the one with the lowest compression, so the absolute highest bit rate, and we assume that anytime we're recording to any interframe codec, like H.264, we're going to be transcoding to ProRes when we get into our post environment. So lowest compression that you can afford, and what I mean by afford is according to your storage media.
And XAVC is one of those formats that holds a lot of different resolutions, right? So you're just going to crank up everything, try to get the best recording you can, and not rely on those files being compatible if you sent them out to another user. Am I thinking correctly about this?
Exactly. We never edit directly from camera unless it's an intraframe codec like ProRes or something RAW.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to have those, you don't want your computer to be calculating frames. You want it to just understand the frames that flow through the system so you get the maximum performance and throughput. Moving to the next question.
Next question comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. What are your rules for using a limiter when making miking instruments? I know that they can make drums sound bigger, but what about other instruments?
Jesse, you're going to dive into this one as well?
We go light on limiters in live environments, and we hold off on compression till post when we're in a studio environment. We might put some compression and limiting on the vocals, but pretty much everything else we try to keep as raw as possible.
I will say that I ran into limiters a ton in the video side of what I used to do because the broadcast standards were such that your signal had to be within limits or you would get all sorts of pushback. The FCC does not like a transmitter that is going beyond their power. So there's ways to trick things into being at least sounding a little louder by putting a hard limiter on something. Compressors and limiters both do similar jobs. They're not the same thing. Limiters bring the top down and make sure that, particularly brick wall limiters, that regardless of what signal coming in, it does not go out over that limit. Compressors do that, also bring up the bottom end to compress the dynamic range into a narrower band. But they're similar, and you really have to, I think, work with them a lot to understand the differences. Jesse, do you want to come back in on this?
Oh, yeah. For like dialogue broadcast or something, we use a lot more compression and limiting because you can see, even if I just lean back, the volume of my voice has changed incredibly. It's just that when you have a microphone sitting on the amplifier, the guitar volume isn't going to be changing that much throughout the show. Like there's just an electric guitar has lower levels of dynamics. No offense to the electric guitarists out there, but I'm just talking at a technical level. You're expecting less variance from the electric guitar coming through an amp with a single position mic than you are from people sitting around microphones, leaning around, talking to each other at different angles. So yeah.
Yeah, and you can imagine in things like a broadcast commercial, you do not want much dynamic range because if someone leans away from the mic and it gets less present in the mix and you're driving in traffic or have the radio on or something like that, you don't want that varying. You want everything into a very, very narrow dynamic range so it always stays punchy and present, and that's not necessarily true. And, on performance in rock and roll, that's one of the reasons handheld mics are so popular. When a rock singer belts, they can move the mic away to manage the dynamic range, and when they want to sing something more restrained, they can bring the mic closer to get that more intimate sound, so it becomes part of their performance. Let's move to the next question.
Next up comes from Mark Sanderson from Chesterfield, UK. Many video switchers, such as the Obsbot Talent and Yolobox, are now including USB as video input sources. Is there a use case for a switcher with a USB input? Nigel, what do you think?
I just want to make sure the question is with just USB inputs. It's not with the USB input. It's just, if I read the question right, the switcher with just USB inputs. So this would be saying, let's take the HDMI out of our ATEMs and just have USB ins. So I've thought about that, and actually, I actually went searching for one and couldn't find one a couple of years ago. And here was the where I got to, maybe right, maybe wrong, where I got to. By the time you've got enough good USB sources that you could do what you could do with a good camera source. You're going to spend so much on the USB cameras that the mixer for $200 or $300 probably isn't the big expense in that. If you bought 4 Link 360s, you're already way ahead of the price of the mixer. If you don't want to do that, then buy a PC, buy a Mac, and put multiple USBs into that, and then use something like Ecamm or something like that. And you've got an electronic version of that without buying a separate box.
Makes sense. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I totally agree. Back in 2019, when Obsbot first came out with their Tiny series, that was one of the videos that I did, was taking 3 Tinies and creating your own little mini studio with a laptop or a desktop. The big problem is that USB is not. It's not really friendly when it comes to video cameras. And it also depends on the video camera, because you'll plug in a video camera thinking, oh, it's going to be great, high-grade quality, and you look at it, and it's just like, this is nothing that hooking up a camera to. Even back in COVID, when Canon put out their little software that would let a lot of the DSLRs work on PCs, it would end up with a 720 or worse resolution for that. So we run into that. I don't know what the Yolobox. I was trying to find Yolobox's specification on USB-A. If it is a 2.0, if it's a 3.0, if it's a 2.0, especially on the early Yoloboxes, which is my guess, that's going to barely get 1080p, and a good 1080p for that matter, no matter what camera you use. So having multiple USBs, you'd have to have something, maybe even something like a Thunderbolt in there, USB-C that's running at 10 gigs per second. And then the other question is that worth it to do that? As Nigel said, you can put together a PC and do it that way. And then, of course, we have things like the Obsbot Tail Air that came out, which also do NDI, which also they have a mini HDMI to it and a USB to it. And I find that the HDMI is going to be a lot more responsive, a lot better than it is the USB.
Not to mention the fact that most webcams output UVC protocol. That's the typical use case where I see video coming to you via a USB connector. And that is kind of a pre-baked signal. There's not much you can do with it, as opposed to most video switchers would prefer one of the higher bandwidth, more configurable things, because a lot of people want to do shading of cameras and other color correction or color control, particularly in a live circumstance. And to break apart that UVC signal into something else where you can really manipulate it is way more complicated than just getting something that works in RGB or YUV or one of the other video protocols that everybody's used to using, particularly SDI and things like that. So I just think that that's not the way that the industry has developed. We had all sorts of multicolor protocols, RGB, for getting cameras into our switchers before. Webcams proved very popular, and that UVC protocol became pretty pervasive out there, but it's not particularly a good format to work with in post, because, as I said, it's just kind of preset and pre-muxed, and you don't really have much control unless you break it apart and put it back together. Let's go to the next question.
Next comes from Greg from Jacksonville, Florida. Do you have a recommendation for a non-Apple Mac Mini monitor?
Jeffrey Powers, what do you think? It's another one of our QR code questions.
Yeah, that was a QR code question. So you didn't say what you're using it for. If you're using it for high-end, like Photoshop or anything like that, that's one thing. If you just need a monitor to connect up to your Mac Mini to do some basic editing or anything like that, a nice portable monitor works. I always use the ViewSonic TD1600 series line because it's a touch screen as well, and allows you to do a lot of different things. I have that on my Mac Minis to do a lot of different switching when I have it out on the road, and then I don't have to bring a keyboard unless I absolutely have to, and then I just bring a small keyboard to work from there, or I remote into the machine. Now that's the other thing, is you could also bring a like a M3 MacBook Air, and then you'd have that you'd have that same resolution that you can use remotely as long as you've paired it up with your Mac Mini.
Jesse Kester.
So I don't have a recommendation of a specific brand, but pretty much every computer we buy gets one good monitor in the $500 to $1,000 range. These are not, professional color grading monitors. These are just good, solid, above 1080 monitors. And then every other monitor is, $100 1080 monitor. And we like having multiple monitors for every computer.
There you go. Next question.
Next question goes back to New Zealand and Peter Moore. I rebuilt my MacBook Pro. I noticed that I had a lot of software I hadn't got around to installing. Courtesy of hardware I bought, and that associated deals. One was that Plugins Alliance. Anyone use their offerings?
I think a lot of people do. Right now, I was looking it up, and I hadn't heard from the Plugin Alliance in a long time, and I guess now it's part of Native Instruments together with Isotope and Brainworks. So they're a solid business, an ongoing thing. Native Instruments has been around for a long time. There's been a lot of kind of rolling in their system a little bit, and maybe I'm just thinking about it because in the voiceover community that I'm a part of, Isotope and things like that have been going through some changes. I think they were sold recently, and everybody's kind of watching to see how they settle into things. One thing I will say, early in my computing, when I was kind of just learning the game, I bought packages that argued, hey, we have 100 different plugins. Pay for this package and you'll get all these things. And boy, when I dug through them and went through, it was a lot of cruft along with the useful plugins, and I kind of changed my thinking. I don't really start with looking at plugins when I'm trying to learn a new skill set. I want to learn the base of how things work, kind of give myself a foundation, and then once I do that, I figure out which specific plugins I have a hole that needs to be filled with that plugin will help me accomplish, as opposed to, oh, wow, this would be great. I'll have, a transition pack. Oh, instead of 50 transitions, I now have 500. Well, it turned out that I had 500 from the new plugin pack, but I only used 5 of them. And it's just depends on how you want to work. I thought we saw another hand, but I guess not. And so we have time for the next question.
Next question comes from Paul Walhus from Austin, Texas. OpenAI debuted advanced voice mode for ChatGPT Plus natural real-time conversations with the ability for AI to detect and respond to emotions. Comment.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's a link there to a LinkedIn post about it from. So Jesse, have you read about this? What do you think?
I'm a hopeless optimist. I truly believe that loneliness is the state in which people are most malleable, that you can pull somebody out of their natural state and get them to behave in ways that are completely unnatural to them if they weren't lonely. And I feel that this is very effective in kind of manipulating large crowds and pointing them in the direction that you want them to point, for better or for worse. And I felt a lot of optimism at the start of the social media revolution that happened in the 2010s and on. We got to see the proliferation of social media, and then we got to see the resulting corruption of that, and that it just became a bias engine that would feed into anybody's bias and kind of push them into increasingly radical directions because that's what benefited the algorithm. Again, I find myself incredibly optimistic about how AI can be implemented in creating communities, in helping people push back against loneliness, in communicating valuable and needed information, in parsing valuable and needed information. I believe that the most essential spine for this to be successful is we accept the fact that we have to pay for these tools, to use these tools, instead of having disparate third-party interests pay for the tools, as happened with social media platforms. So I'm very optimistic. I do hope that we have learned about the destructive path of third-party sponsorship on these communication and information platforms. And I hope we've learned a lot about feeding into cognitive bias as we move into these AI companions.
Well said. Nigel.
Yeah, I went looking for this. I haven't had a chance to try it or to demo it. I agree with a lot of what Jesse said. I would tell you that, as with everything nowadays, never accept a single source of information. If you tend to agree with it, then that's confirmation bias. If you disagree with it because of the source of it, that's confirmation bias. You need to get to multiple sources of multiple things. And then be very careful about the nature of that content. So my wife and I were using the ChatGPT. We were talking to it about a medical problem that a member of our family has. And we asked it some very simple questions. We are not going to go to our doctor and say, please change their course of, medication as a result of it. But it did inform us and did give us information and useful input. And I think we've all got to remember, that's a great use. But if you start asking it political questions, if you start asking it things to reinforce your biases, then you will just reinforce your biases.
Every physician I know has said to me over the course of the last 10 years, my patients are coming in. They said, I looked it up on the internet. Why don't you try and then insert therapy or drug or whatever? I hear exactly what you're saying, Nigel, and I've run into the same kind of things. We're in new territory here, and everybody's having to struggle to figure out how to judge what's real, particularly with things like this question directly addresses from Paul. As AI gets better at sounding more human, does that mean its reasoning is more human? And it's an open question. I don't have answers to it. I just know that it's an interesting time to be having to deal with this. And not just those of us who are on the panel who are, certainly well-mature individuals, been around a long time, but we've got new generations coming up. They're going to have to deal with this as well. It's going to be very tricky. Jesse, what do you think?
AI is not human. It is not your friend. It does not have feelings. It doesn't feel love or excitement about anything. It doesn't feel disgust or depression about anything. And it is incumbent on you, the user, to keep this in mind at all times.
Next question. Oops, Jeffrey, you're muted still.
That's wild. Once again, we've got a question from Gabriela from Sault Ste. Maria. How did the rings at the Olympics closing show work? They didn't have the same inside structures, and some weren't in the same on both sides. How did they get them up in the air and keep them together when they are so heavy?
It was a fabulous thing. I hope everybody had a chance to see some of that either in real time when it was happening or in replay. For those of you who might have missed the thing, they had gigantic, they looked like they were probably 15 to 20 feet tall constructions that were not just a single ring, but kind of double rings put together, and aerial acrobats used them as they flew through the air to perform on them. It was I hate to use this as a verb, but it was kind of a Cirque du Soleil kind of expectation. It was a beautiful artistic thing, in my opinion. And yes, the hoist industry for theatrical productions, I mean, when you saw Tom Cruise leap off the thing, there was a hoist system involved. He was cabled to it. And so all the big concerts use these very high-end hoist systems to raise and lower things. And I don't imagine that those, I don't know if they were steel or aluminum or titanium or whatever. I mean, the Olympic budget is significant. So they built those things out of whatever material they thought was best to pull off the gag that they were trying to pull off. It worked, to my mind, very beautifully, and I thought it was really interesting. Because they had done things on the stage floor where multiple people were on top and they rolled around, they were highly constructed and engineered to be able to take the weight of people. So I know, how do they fly them and keep them up? With hoists and levers and cables and all the traditional things that theatrical productions on that scale use to bring them up. But I just think that artistically at the same time, it was a beautiful beautiful closing ceremonies, and hats off to the folks in Paris for putting on a fabulous show. I really enjoyed. I didn't get a chance to watch very much, but the closing ceremonies we did watch. My wife and I sat and watched, and we're just happy to be there. Next question.
Next question comes from Zach Stallsmith from Chautauqua, New York. I'm experimenting with recording to Blackmagic Cloud from my ATEM Mini Pro Iso. Any issues or things I should be on the lookout for that the panel may have noticed?
The only thing I would be careful about is just making sure that you don't spend so much time working in the cloud that billing comes up. I'm not quite sure. I haven't subscribed to the Blackmagic Cloud yet, so I don't know what its costs are. I am paying more and more attention to the fact that the monthly hits into my bank account seem to be proliferating at a pretty substantial rate. So I'm becoming more and more sensitive to subscription stuff, and I put this in one of those categories. I don't use Blackmagic's Resolve as an editor enough to really, for me, justify being a subscriber to the Blackmagic Cloud, but I think Grant and those folks they're some of the best engineering out there, and if you need that kind of service, I can see why its integration with the ATEM Minis and the rest of that would be very useful for a lot of people and a lot of production services. So we have a lot of people in the office hours community who are heavily invested in the Blackmagic ecosystem, using their tools to very good effect. So let us know what you experience as you go through it. Jesse, you popped in here late. Did you have some thoughts?
I could be wrong on the pricing, but it looks like it's $150 a month for 5 terabytes of storage on the Blackmagic Cloud.
Yeah, so that would put it clearly in a business expense as opposed to most people's personal, I want to play with it. I do think Blackmagic has a long history of promising and then delivering on their promises. They also have a long history of innovation in the marketplace. So if you're looking for a cloud production system, I would say that they're probably one of the premier places to take a look if you have a business use case that can afford that kind of a hit. I mean, that's, somewhere in the $15,000 a year range, or plus or minus. So depending on probably how you configure it. So it's a pretty significant cost, $1,500. Sorry about that. Let's go to the next question.
Next up comes from Roscoe Jones from Madison, Indiana. How close are we to most mixing controls being only remote surfaces and having no local audio routing other than monitoring? Is there any downside to this, and is there a standardized remote connection protocol?
I've not heard of one that's dominating everything. I don't know whether we didn't have anybody who was using this who raised a hand on this one. Most mixing controllers, there's just a ton of different mixing boards out there. They all have their own different protocols. They're coming from different manufacturers. There are some protocols that seem to go across pieces of hardware and across the industry from various manufacturers, but there are also plenty of, we use this particular protocol inside our mixers for communications in and out. So, sorry, I can't do more than that here because it's not my core competency. But if that's unsatisfying for you, Roscoe, then come back in on another Wednesday when our high-end audio crew is in place, and we should be able to get you better information. Let's go to the next question.
Next up comes from Guy Cochran. He asks, is the new Obsbot Talent worth $1,000?
And we have a couple of people who want to weigh in on this. Nigel.
I think if you're in the Obsbot ecosystem and you don't want the complexity of rolling your own system, and money is not the issue, then the answer is it might be. And I think one of, when you look at it, it has 2 HDMI inputs. It has a couple of USB inputs. Going back to our question earlier of, could I do a USB only type mixer, a switcher? It might be if money isn't the object and that's the ecosystem you're in. I think what most of us do is assemble our own situation, which uses the cameras we've got and wants a much lower thing than that. A simple ATEM will cover it, or something more than that. But if you're in that ecosystem, it might be the right answer for you, but it's not cheap.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yes, I totally agree with Nigel, because I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It's a Magewell. That we found that out.
Branded?
Yeah, we found that out at NAB, that Obsbot is using Magewell's Director Mini as their case. Now, does it work exactly like the Director Mini? No. Obsbot, as Nigel said, the infrastructure for Obsbot is really growing. In fact, I did a video a week or two ago. I'm waiting for my talent so I can actually take a look at it, but I will have one shortly. But Obsbot also came out with their Obsbot their Obsbot Live, which is basically it's a phone switcher for your tail air. Now, one of the features on the Obsbot Live is the basically camera direct to a device, which they really didn't name when they came out with Live. The talent is probably where that's going to be fitting in. If it hasn't now, it will in the future. So they're going to be bringing out their own screens. The Director Mini will have their own app with their own features on there. Will they be the exact same app with the exact same features? Time will tell. Most likely not, but you'll definitely have a lot of things. And the one thing that the Director Mini does do that I believe the Obsbot Talent doesn't do, unless they changed that since NAB, was bringing graphics into play, as in through an app, so somebody from their phone could actually bring in and out graphics and go from there. Where Obsbot's focus is on the multi-cam option, being able to connect up two HDMI cameras, one USB camera, and an NDI camera, I believe is the third one. Oh yeah, and SRT is also going to be part of that whole thing with talent.
It's fascinating to me that, multicam live switching on iSeries mobile devices was not a thing a few years ago, and now there's just so much activity in that area. And I'm thinking, of course, of the Apple approach with the iPad Pros and their multicam switching thing for iPhones. It's just amazing to me that there's this big a market, or they appear to believe there's this big a market for small-scale remote multicam switching using devices and small cameras like the Obsbot and things like this, that there are that many people who want to do this. It's going to be a fascinating thing to see how it all shakes out over the course of time. Let's go to our next question.
Next question comes from Chester Sweeney from Las Vegas, Nevada. I was recently pondering ways to expand my Foley tools inventory, and I saw the Behringer B906 dynamic microphone. What's this mic mainly used for? And for $45 on Sweetwater, should I buy it? Is a QR code, by the way.
Oh, yeah. It's always hard to suggest, should I buy it? I mean, here's one of the ways I think about it. I'm not saying this is the best way, but if that's retailing for $45, you've got the cost of goods, you've got shipping, you've got advertising, you've got all these things inside of that. So that is going to mean to me that probably the parts build of a device like this is maybe a third. So with $45 in there, $8 to $10 worth of parts and stuff that's actually inside of the microphone. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. There's been a lot of development in terms of mic capsules and things like that on the low end, and we all have microphones now built into our laptops and phones and security systems, and Lord knows there's plenty of inexpensive microphones out there. But I would be a little bit concerned about a microphone designed specifically for being a microphone for recording the human voice that was at that low a cost of parts price point. I could be totally wrong, and it could sound fabulous, but in my experience, I've learned to hear the difference between a $10 mic capsule and a hundreds of dollar mic capsule on a quality large diaphragm condenser mic, and I still find that buying things for the long run that have much higher quality has turned out for me over the course of my career to be a much better strategy than buying a bunch of inexpensive stuff. Every once in a while I'm fooled, and a tool that I thought I would never use professionally has made the cut. And I'll never forget when I moved into DV camcorders from the analog stuff I used before, I got some really good results out of them, and I was able to compete in the marketplace against people who are using Betacams and things like that. And it was finding out that there was something that did a good job at a lower price point that really accelerated my business. But the number of times that scenario took precedence over I'm glad I bought a quality piece of gear that's going to last my whole career and I can depend on to work every single time, that ratio has been pretty much in favor of buy once, cry once, as we say around here. Jeffrey Powers, you had some thoughts about this?
So I believe the Behringer 906 is trying to mimic the Sennheiser 609. These microphones, yeah, they're great. They're great in practice. They're great, but I wouldn't use them in any production. But the bigger thing is, as the price, I've been noticing in the last couple of weeks, Behringer has been dropping their prices like a lot. Now, you can actually get an X Air for like $350 now. And I'm wondering if they're getting ready to refresh their lines and, of course, dropping prices so they can get rid of a lot of inventory. I don't know what the original MSRP of the 906 was, but it definitely looks like it's been price dropped. I bet you it was around $80 to $90 for that microphone. So we'll see what happens, but I'm pretty sure it would be a decent deal for practice, but not in production.
Yeah, I kind of support your thinking there. I had this circumstance early in my career where I was just starting out, and I bought a bunch of lights from a company I don't think is still around, Smith Victor, and I used them for about 8 months. And at the end of 8 months, none of the knobs were working right, and the stands were getting all bent up. And when I finally was able to move up to more pro-level equipment, a lot of the little niggling problems kind of went away. And I took that as a big lesson. I took it as sometimes things can be just too cheap. They seem like a good idea at the time, and they can be if that's all you can afford. And having something is always better than having nothing. But in the long run, investing in the tools of your trade, if you want to learn the trade, is something where money is usually very well spent. Let's go on to the next question.
Next question comes back in a QR code from Gabriela from Sault Ste. Marie. Did people like the live-to-tape thing for the Olympics closing show and in LA? The extra lower thirds were nice, but I'd rather have a live show.
Nigel.
So I have to say, I didn't notice it was live to tape. I thought I was watching it live, at least in Austin, Texas. It felt live. It was crushingly bad. Even the Tom Cruise thing I didn't think worked terrifically well. And, you go all the way to Hollywood and you play music. I thought that was an interesting choice. There were so many things they could have done, and they seemed to miss it. I was actually in the stadium for the closing of the Beijing Olympics. And it's actually a very long ceremony where the athletes come in. And there's actually relatively little, unlike the opening ceremony, drama. But to me, it didn't work at all. I thought it was boring. But I have to admit, I thought I was watching it live. Had I known I was watching it tape, I might have tried to DVR it and speed it up.
Thank you for that. There's nothing I like more than a clash of different perspectives, because that really helps people learn. So excellent. Thank you. Jesse, you want to break the tie or you want to just stay out of it?
Oh, no, I'm jumping right in. They didn't come to Hollywood and play music. They came to Hollywood and played Red Hot Chili Peppers. Huge difference. That's one of the greatest things in life is music is so subjective and art is so subjective, and there's room for the thing I love about working in the creative industries is you get to see this incredible spread from this side people on the fringe to on the other side people on the fringe. And if you're open to it and looking, you can learn and change and be molded from all those points of view. I love that. So again, Nigel, thank you. I love nothing more than people disagreeing and having a good articulate reason as to why. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question comes from Pedro G. Gonzalez III from Oklahoma City, asking, the M4 Mac Mini is going to get miniaturized, but what do you think could happen with the number of ports on the back?
Jesse, you want to start us out?
I dread the fact that they're going to go down. The ones, first of all, I can't afford to lose any USB-C or USB inputs. If the Ethernet and the headphone jack are gone, then the Mac Mini has almost no use for us on our desktop. They're trying, I believe they're trying to distinguish the Mac Mini from the Studio, and they're going to have to push it a little bit far, and that's going to be the biggest cost, I believe. Also, heat dissipation is going to be another pretty big cost.
Nigel.
So I think we should be clear that this is a rumor started by Gurman from Bloomberg that has been riffed on by many people and is now being reported as fact. This may never happen, as confident as people seem to be. I think the reality is you can look at some of the mini PCs that are coming out and say there's definitely room for 2 or 4 USB. Maybe there's room for an HDMI. Maybe a room for an Ethernet port. Who knows? But watching Apple, as many of us have for many years, what would frighten me is they went, look, this is the chance to get rid of all connections. And we're just going to do all of this over Wi-Fi and AirPlay. And that would, that might be an interesting experience for all of us. But I wouldn't count any chickens until they've hatched.
Jeffrey Powers.
I totally agree with Nigel's assessment. You got to remember that the M4 is, it's not as wide, but it's also probably twice the height from these artist renderings. So there's plenty of spots to put in ports, and if there are no ports, I would guess that Apple's looking into some sort of adapter port that you can plug in just basically by setting the M4 on top of it, so they can sell you a system rather than sell you a device. And then once again, like I said, I use all my Mac Minis headless, so I always remote in via a MacBook Air or even my desktop and work from there. So that's a possibility as well, as long as the latency is low and as long as you still get the same quality, which Apple has really perfected on that, then you should be able to use them without heads. But I'm pretty sure that there's going to be at least 4 USB-C or Thunderbolt ports on the back and probably an HDMI. Maybe they'll get rid of the Ethernet port, but we'll see what happens.
Jesse Kester, you want to come back in on this?
Oh, Jeffrey, I wish I was optimistic like you. There's room for ports on every Mac device I have, and they are addicted to not using that room to put as many ports. You know how long that fight was to get the MacBook Pro back to having an HDMI and an SD card slot. I just worry. I'm not as optimistic.
And this is such a fascinating discussion. All I'm going to say is I'm sitting here looking at my iPad Pro, which is sitting on a little stand, and when I switch to it, I didn't use that graphic earlier in the show, but that was the Obsbot Talent. I'm just thinking to myself, that's coming through a little lightning cable, just one lightning port. That's all I've got on it. And that's coming out and being transferred to HDMI, and it as a content consumption and in some ways with the Apple Pencil, a content creation device. It's been more useful than I thought. Do I still love my ports? Yes, don't get me wrong. And in fact, I wish I had 2 or 3 more ports on my laptop. But they do a lot leveraging one port on an iPad Pro to give you a lot of capability. So I don't know what's coming next. It's going to be interesting to find out, but I'm just still astonished that there's that much power in a little thin thing that originally was introduced out of an envelope. Next question.
Next question comes from Henry Ramos from Yonkers, New York. Magewell announced a $200 price drop on their Director Mini to $1,099, plus big firmware update. Time to consider buying?
Jeffrey Powers, what do you think?
Oh, it was a consideration to buy at $12.99. Like I said, I saw it at NAB. I was very impressed. It was blowing away what Yolobox did, and because Yolobox just came out with their own version of Stream Deck, as an example, and it's a wired Stream Deck into a remote machine, and it didn't make much sense to me. What Magewell is doing is they're moving all that stuff to app-based connections. So like I said, if you wanted to do graphics, you could hand a phone to somebody and say, you're going to be doing the graphics. You just have to push the button on the phone. And then they don't need to be in front of that little device to do that. You can have somebody switching without having to be in front of that little device to do that. You have somebody changing the graphics on a completely different device. Now, I haven't seen the new firmware update. I don't know what the new features are with that firmware update, but even with that old firmware update, it was definitely worth considering purchasing if you are in these small, what I call the backpack streamer type situations.
Next question.
Next question comes from Guy Cochran from Seattle. What is in the Olympic Broadcast Systems virtual van?
And he's got a link there from Paris, how the OBS Virtual Van project opens up a new era of production. I had not seen this yet, and I think this is the kind of thing that's going to really intrigue Alex. So I would imagine we might have this might be fodder for a whole show here to break down what they did in terms of virtual production from the Olympics. Obviously, there was some in there. I didn't have much time to watch actual Olympics coverage. One of the things I was trying to do, I know they virtualized one of the announcers and put them in the form of an, Keith, I can't remember who it was. Anyway, they had a virtual version of that announcer announce some things. I didn't get a chance to see any of that. I wanted to very much to see how they pulled it off. But I suspect we'll have a show on technology out of the Olympics. And if so, Guy, definitely bring this back in. I don't think any of us here on the panel today know any more than that about it. So fingers crossed for the future. Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes from Francis Fry from Cambridge, Massachusetts, asking, what do you think about the format of text and video when you read questions? I'm looking for guidance for Q&A recordings for my students.
This is a very weirdly individual thing, and I'll say that as an announcer who's had to read off teleprompters and scripts my entire life. In most cases, the scripts that I have gotten after we moved out of the advertising era where I was going into a studio to do things, those copy things were formatted in a traditional kind of radio copy way, double-spaced. I was using a pen to mark up my scripts. Boy, everything has changed, and now I get scripts from various customers and clients and creative partners that are all over the place. And I don't think formatting text and video has any standards left anymore for questions. I know a lot of people use our kind of teleprompter view, which we have in the back end, which blows things up and put it there. You will see on the screen when we put the questions there at the bottom of multiple views of panelists and things like that. And some people, in my case, I just use a small block of text in front of me because my eyes are comfortable reading text if it's clear and the font is good and there's enough contrast between the font and its background. I can read off of almost anything. I've been doing this so long. Jesse, what do you think? What's your 2 cents?
I agree with everything you said. That was kind of an inward-facing answer. I'm thinking more in terms of looking out towards the audience. The most important thing is that when you're doing a Q&A session with an audience is that you do not lose the audience at the question stage, because if they're not following the question, then they have checked out for the entire answer. And that's why you'll see on this show that advocates regularly for never reproducing on your keynote slide the words that you're saying with your mouth. Like, you don't want to block a text and to say it to the crowd at the same time. You'll see on this show, we have the text on the screen as the question is being read, and that pushes back against the audience getting lost at the question stage, which is death for a Q&A session.
100% agree. I mean, to me, if you're reading your slides in front of an audience, you are essentially saying to them, I think you're too stupid to read this yourself. That is audience hostile. We do it here. We're partially a radio show and partially a visual show, so somebody may not be having the benefit of seeing the visual part of our show. So reading out the question keeps them oriented and keeps them here. It's a different thing. It depends. Jeffrey Powers.
So when it comes to doing something live, it's always nice to have somebody that's actually pre-proofing and kind of changing the question. Like, for instance, in this question, I changed how to what, because that, somebody typing versus what is grammatically correct is always a stumbling block when it comes to reading a question. If it comes from a teleprompter, you want to have the teleprompter that's easy to read and large. I'm reading from a teleprompter that's 7 inches long or wide, but that's because I'm so close to it. And also, when I'm reading through through our little teleprompter thing, I've actually changed some of the CSS coding so it's something that I can read. My eyes can follow it a little bit better. Fonts are a big thing, so if you don't have a nice clean font, you might start tripping up over words. And then, of course, font size for somebody's reading style, and being able to set that from there. If you do need cards that people are reading the questions from, have those cards nice, prominently shown, because people can see, oh yeah, he's reading from a card. We can kind of identify to that, and then make sure that the questions, once again, are short and sweet and not really long with a lot of terms and numbers and acronyms.
Very quickly, I just wanted to add one more thing. We talk a lot about writing for the ear versus writing for the eye in script reading and things like that. It's a big difference. No one says, "What are you doing?" They say, "What are you doing?" And those are two different kind of rhythms. And so if you're writing it for a textbook, "What are you doing?" makes perfect sense. Reading that stiffens the read and makes it less conversational. Let's go to the next question. Oops, you're still muted, Jeffrey.
Dang it. Tommy Shantz from St. Paul, Minnesota asks, I have acquired a Shure ULXD2 J50 mic system that is no longer allowed for the U.S. Can these be reworked to a legal frequency?
Sometimes there are plenty of other countries around the world where that is not an illegal frequency. That's illegal in the U.S. because the FCC sold off those frequencies and it's no longer allowed to broadcast on. So my technique in the past has always been try to go on one of the international websites and see if you can get value out of it and flip that in there. It might be able to be reworked, but that's probably going to be expensive. And only some manufacturers have been around a long time. Shure's been around a long time, but I don't know if they reset those and they could do that at a cost-effective rate. Let's see if we can get one more in.
Last question comes from Peter Moore from Auckland, New Zealand. As Nigel Dessau is on our de-facto Homekit expert, has Matter been adopted across vendors, and is it a success, or is it slowly getting there?
Nigel, what do you say?
So I'd never claimed to be a HomeKit expert. I spent a lot of my time on the higher end of the market, but I'll tell you what I see. I think the 1.3 spec that came out this year is a much better example. I think for the next few years, what you're going to watch is limited interaction. So will I be able to turn off a HomeKit device from my A word, and can I use Siri to, do something on my Amazon thing? The answer is yes. You're going to be able to do that. It's a basic function, and Matter allows for that. Are you going to have deep integration? Are you going to have the ability to transparently do everything from one to the other? Probably not. Now, 5 years' time, maybe not. But I think you'll see it slowly getting adopted and slowly working across. And then that will decide how fast people want to go. But I think most people are going to want to try and control their own ecosystems for a little longer.
Thank you all for being here. This is one of those days when we don't have a second hour. Tomorrow on our Thursday show, Scott Silberstein of HMS Media in Chicago is going to be my guest. Scott has worked in theater and broadcast for many years, holds multiple Emmys, and it should be an excellent discussion. So I hope you tune in tomorrow. On Friday, dongles, adapters, and cables. Oh my. I'll look at how we connect gazintas to gazoutas, as a friend of mine once taught me in the early days of the business. That's on Friday. That takes us to the Talk Traversal. Thank you for all of your participation here. Specific thanks to our producers, all of you who entered questions for today's show. This show doesn't exist without your participation, and we truly appreciate it. To the panelists, thank you very much. It was the more people we have here, the more expertise we have, and the more people volunteer their time to be on the panels. It really helps us get better and help us more accurately answer your questions. So thank you to the panelists and to our amazing back-end crew. It's great to have the crew building back up after some people were overseas for a period of time. We'll be back tomorrow with that special guest at the Traversal. Today we would have traveled 48,000 miles if we'd had to run around and talk to all the people who asked questions today and get them into a studio somewhere, for example. That's 78,000 kilometers and 384 million bananas for scale. After hours, always on. See you there. Bye.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you all. I could not have made it through this without everybody pitching in, so thank you.